The night Melissa said she was going to a bachelorette weekend in Kelowna, I believed her without a second thought. We'd been married for 6 years. 6 years is long enough to stop asking too many questions. Long enough to trust the small details. The overnight bag by the door. The name of the hotel she'd mentioned twice. The text she sent Friday afternoon that just said, "Don't wait up. Love you." I remember reading that and thinking it was a little odd. She'd been gone since noon. I wasn't planning to wait up for anyone. I'm a residential architect. I spend my days thinking about how spaces hold people, how a hallway can feel like a welcome or a warning, how a room can breathe or suffocate. I've always believed that the structure of a thing tells you everything about what's going on inside it. I just never applied that logic to my own marriage until it was too late. Our house was a 1960s split level in the Westboro neighborhood of Ottawa. I'd renovated most of it myself over the years. Stripped floors, new windows, opened up the kitchen to catch the afternoon light. Melissa had chosen the colors. Everything was gray. Not a moody, intentional gray. Just gray. Like she'd picked it because it was the safest possible answer. I didn't notice how quiet the house had gotten until she left that Friday, and I was standing in the kitchen making coffee and I couldn't hear a single thing. Saturday came and went. I texted her once around noon, "How's it going?" And she replied an hour later with a champagne emoji and nothing else. I told myself that was fine. Girls' weekends are girls' weekends. Sunday morning, I woke up to silence again, made eggs, watched the Senators lose, started a site review I'd been putting off all week. It was almost 7 in the evening when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Adrienne standing on my porch in the rain. Adrienne is Melissa's younger sister. She's 29, 3 years younger than Melissa. They grew up together in Kingston, moved to Ottawa around the same time, see each other for dinners and holidays, and the occasional Sunday market. She was wearing a light jacket that was completely soaked through, and she had the expression of someone who had been driving in circles, trying to decide whether or not to stop. "Hey," she said, "is Melissa here?" I told her no. Melissa was in Kelowna. Adrienne looked at me for a long moment. "Kelowna," she repeated. "Bachelorette weekend." She left Friday. Something passed across Adrienne's face that I didn't know how to read. She pressed her lips together and looked past me into the house. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back and held the door open. She didn't take off her jacket right away. She stood in the front hall dripping on the tile and asked me when exactly Melissa had left, and I told her, and she nodded slowly like she was doing math. "Who's the bachelorette?" she asked. I told her I thought it was someone from Melissa's book club. A woman named Trish, maybe. Or Tracy. "Melissa's not in a book club," Adrienne said. She said it very quietly, like she was telling me something she wished she didn't have to. I asked her to sit down. She did. She sat at the kitchen island and I put the kettle on because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I asked her if she wanted tea. She said yes. We sat there for a few minutes while the kettle heated up, and I didn't say anything because I was afraid of what I was starting to understand. "She told me not to say anything," Adrienne said eventually. "She told me she'd explain everything when she got back. But she's been gone 2 days and she's not answering my calls, and I didn't know where else to go." I poured the tea. I set a mug in front of her. I asked her what she knew. She said she didn't know much. She said Melissa had come to her apartment on Thursday night, which was the night before she left, and had told her she needed a few days away to think. She hadn't said where she was going. She'd just said she needed space. She'd also said, and Adrienne paused here, wrapped both hands around the mug. She'd said that her marriage wasn't working, and she didn't know what to do about it. That was the sentence that sat in the room with us. I didn't yell. I'm not someone who yells. I just stood there on my side of the kitchen island and looked out the window at the rain on the backyard lawn and felt something very calm and very cold settle into my chest. I asked Adrienne if Melissa had mentioned anyone else. She said no. I believed her. I still do. There's a way people look when they're holding back something important. And Adrienne didn't look like that. She looked frightened and sad and sorry in the way that people are sorry when they didn't cause the problem, but they're the one who had to deliver the news. She stayed for almost 2 hours. We didn't talk about Melissa the whole time. Eventually, we just talked. About her job at the landscape architecture firm she'd been with for 3 years. About the house I was currently designing for a family in Canada. About the fact that neither of us had eaten dinner. I reheated some soup I'd made Thursday, and she ate a bowl of it at my kitchen island, and we talked like two people who were both trying very hard not to think about the obvious thing. When she left, she paused at the door and said, "I'm sorry, Owen." And then she caught herself and said, "Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I told her it was all right." Melissa came back on Tuesday. I don't mean she showed up at the house. I mean she texted me Tuesday morning and said she was home, she was at her sister's, she needed a few days and then we should talk. I read the text twice and then I put my phone face down on my desk and sat with it for a long time. I called a family lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Denise Okafor, and she had an office on Elgin Street, and she was the kind of person who let you finish a sentence before she responded. I told her what I knew. She asked a lot of questions. She told me that in Ontario, the grounds for divorce didn't require proof of infidelity. The Family Law Act works on a no-fault basis, and the division of property follows a net family property calculation regardless of why the marriage ended. She said what mattered most right now was documenting everything I could about our shared assets and making sure I understood what the matrimonial home rules meant for us specifically. I hadn't even thought about the house yet, and then I had to start thinking about the house. We'd bought it together 7 years ago, before we were married. Put both our names on the title. I'd done almost all the renovation work myself. Weekends, evenings, 3 summers of crawling around in the ceiling, and refinishing floors by hand. It had appraised recently at just under $900,000, which in Ottawa these days isn't unusual for the neighborhood. Denise explained the concept of equalization of net family property. She was careful and clear about it. She wasn't unkind, but she also wasn't soft about what the numbers were going to look like. I drove home that evening and stood in the front hall and looked at the staircase I'd rebuilt from scratch, the banisters, the refinished oak treads, the light that came through the east window and landed on the wall just right in the morning. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why not. Melissa and I didn't speak for 9 days. She communicated through her lawyer, a man named Patrick Bouchard, who had an office in Centretown and wrote very formal emails. His first email arrived on the Thursday after Melissa got back, and it outlined her position on the matrimonial home. She wanted to buy me out. I sat with that for a day. And then I called Denise, and we started talking about what that would actually look like. During those 9 days, Adrian texted me twice. The first time was just to check in, "How are you doing?" And I told her I was okay, which was partly true. The second time was a Friday evening. She said she was sorry for the role she'd accidentally played in all of this, and she said she hoped I wasn't angry with her. I told her I wasn't. That was completely true. I don't know exactly when things shifted between Adrian and me. It wasn't one moment. It was more like a slow accumulation of small moments that I kept trying to put in the right category and couldn't quite manage. She called me one afternoon about 3 weeks after everything started. She was walking home from the market on Wellington West, and she said she'd passed a cafe we'd all gone to once. The 3 of us, a couple of years ago, and she'd wanted to go in, but it felt strange to go in alone. She didn't say anything else. She just said she thought of me and wanted to see how I was doing. I told her I'd had a hard week. The valuation on the house had come back, and the numbers were making everything feel very real and very permanent. She asked if I'd eaten dinner. I said I was about to make something. She said, "I make a very decent lentil soup if you want company. No pressure." I drove over to her apartment in Hintonburg. She'd lived there for 2 years, a second-floor unit in an old triplex with original hardwood and good bones. I looked at the ceiling joists as soon as I walked in, which is a habit I can't turn off. She laughed when she noticed. We ate soup at her small kitchen table. She had 2 mismatched chairs and a potted fern that was doing its best, and a bookshelf that took up the entire east wall. It was the kind of apartment that felt genuinely lived in. We talked for 3 hours. At some point, I noticed that I'd stopped thinking about the equalization numbers. I noticed I was just present, in a way I hadn't been in a long time. When I left, I sat in my car for a minute before I started it. I was careful with myself. I was very deliberate about what I was and wasn't going to let myself feel. Adrian was Melissa's sister. My marriage wasn't over yet, not on paper. I had lawyers and valuations and emails with formal letterheads to deal with. Whatever I was feeling could wait. I told myself that clearly and firmly, and then I drove home. Over the next 2 months, the legal process moved at the pace. Legal processes move, which is slow, methodical, occasionally infuriating. Denise was excellent. She helped me understand that while Melissa's offer to buy me out was technically an option, the numbers she was proposing were low, and I had the right to push back. I also learned, through a question I finally asked Denise directly, that infidelity doesn't affect division of property in Ontario. I'd wondered. I'd look things up at 2 in the morning on my phone like everyone does. Denise confirmed it. In this province, property is divided based on financial contribution and the Family Law Act's equalization formula, not on fault. So whether or not Melissa had been somewhere other than Kelowna, and with whoever she might have been with, it didn't change the math. That was clarifying, in its own way. What I focused on instead was the documentation. I had invoices, receipts, a detailed renovation log I'd kept for insurance purposes, every replaced window, every meter of plumbing, every weekend I'd spent in the crawl space. Denise said this would matter in calculating contributions to the marital home. It mattered. In the middle of all this, Adrian and I developed a kind of careful friendship. Dinners every couple of weeks. A walk along the river on a Saturday when neither of us had plans. She started sending me photos sometimes, a building detail she thought I'd find interesting, a tree that had fallen across a path, and she said it reminded her of the way I talked about structural failure. I sent her a photo once of a window I'd salvaged from a demo site. Old wavy glass, slightly imperfect, the kind that bends the light in a way new glass can't. She texted back, "It's beautiful. What are you going to do with it?" I said I wasn't sure yet. We didn't talk about what was between us. We were careful about that, both of us, in a way that I think we each understood without having to say it out loud. There were lines. I was aware of them every time we were together, so was she. And we held to them, not because we were forced to, but because we both genuinely believed it was the right thing to do. She told me once, on one of our walks along the Ottawa River pathway near the Remick Rapids, that she'd spent a long time trying to figure out if she was just stepping in to fill a void, if what she felt was real, or if it was proximity and circumstance. She said she didn't have a clean answer, but that she knew the difference between sympathy and something else, and this felt like something else. I told her I understood. I told her we had to wait. She said she knew. The mediation process took most of the fall. Melissa and I never spoke directly during that period. Everything went through our lawyers. At the first joint session, I sat across a table from her for the first time since she'd left, and I looked at her and tried to find something I recognized, some version of the person I'd married, and I couldn't quite locate it. She looked the same. She looked like Melissa. But there was a distance in the room that had nothing to do with the physical space between our chairs. Her lawyer raised the issue of the house again. Melissa still wanted it. She'd proposed a figure that, even accounting for the mortgage she'd be taking on, felt to me like she was discounting the value of what I'd built into those walls. Denise had submitted our documentation, all of it, 2 weeks before the session, the renovation logs, the invoices, the before and after appraisals. She'd done a careful calculation of my non-monetary contribution to the matrimonial home. By the end of the second mediation session, the number on the table had changed significantly. Melissa's lawyer asked for a recess. During the recess, I went outside and stood on the sidewalk on Elgin Street and watched the November traffic and thought about the oak staircase and the east window and the afternoon light and whether any of it really mattered the way I'd thought it did. I went back inside. We reached an agreement. Melissa would receive her share of the net family property calculated fairly. She would not receive the house. I would take on the mortgage. She would receive a lump sum equalization payment based on the formula, which I financed partly through a home equity line of credit and partly through savings. It wasn't painless, but it was fair, and Denise had fought to make sure of that. We signed the separation agreement in early December. The divorce itself wouldn't be final for another year. Canada requires a 1-year separation period before a divorce can be granted. But the legal and financial matters were settled. We were separated, formally, and living our own lives. I spent that December alone in the house I'd built with my own hands. I repainted the front bedroom, Melissa's office, in a color I'd seen in a salvage shop window, a blue-green, somewhere between lake water and spruce. It was completely different from the gray she'd chosen. I stood back and looked at it in the afternoon light and felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time, which was something close to relief. On Christmas Eve, Adrian texted me to say her plans had fallen through and she was staying in the city. I said I was making dinner, and she was welcome. She came over. She brought a bottle of Ontario White and a container of butter tarts from a bakery she liked on Somerset. I made roast chicken and the kind of simple roasted vegetables that don't require much thought. We ate at the big kitchen table and talked about everything except the things we'd been careful about all year. Toward the end of the evening, she asked if she could see what I'd done to the front bedroom. I brought her upstairs and turned on the light. She stood in the doorway and looked at the blue-green walls and the salvaged wavy glass window I'd finally installed last month and the new bookshelf I'd built along the north wall, simple and clean. "You built the bookshelf," she said. It wasn't a question. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It looks like you, Owen." I turned and looked at her. She was still standing in the doorway, hands in her sweater pockets. She wasn't doing anything with her face. She was just looking at the room. I said her name. She looked at me. "The separation agreement is signed," I said. "It's been finalized. I wanted you to know that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Melissa told me. I wasn't sure if you knew." "I knew," she said. "I just didn't want to bring it up." I asked why. She said, "Because I didn't want you to feel like I was waiting for a starting gun." And I thought about that. I thought about all the careful months, the river walks, the lentil soup, the photos of salvaged windows and fallen trees, the deliberateness we'd both held to, even when it was hard, even when neither of us was quite sure what we were holding for. I said, "I've been wanting to tell you something for a while." She said, "I know." I said, "You know?" She smiled. She said, "Owen, I have eyes." The family reaction was complicated. Melissa's parents are in Kingston, and they're warm people, the kind of people who tried very hard to stay neutral through the separation. When things became clear between Adrian and me, her mother called. It was a long call. It was hard. There was hurt and confusion, and a lot of things said that needed to be said. Her father didn't call. He sent a card, an actual card in the mail, that said, "I hope you're both sure and nothing else." I've kept it. I'm not entirely sure why. Melissa didn't speak to Adrian for 4 months. That was the hardest part for Adrian, and I never minimized it. I told her I understood if she needed to step back. I meant it. She said she didn't. Eventually, Melissa called her. I don't know what they said. Adrian told me it was a long conversation and it was painful, and it wasn't resolved in a single call. She said she and Melissa would probably never be what they'd been before, and she'd had to make peace with that. She sounded sad when she said it, genuinely sad, and I sat with her in that sadness without trying to fix it. I'm not going to tell you everything wrapped up neatly. It didn't. A family is a structure too, and when you pull out a load-bearing piece, everything shifts. Some of it shifts in ways that hold. Some of it shifts in ways that take a long time to settle. The divorce was finalized the following November. On that day, I was in the middle of a site meeting for a residential project in Westboro. A family wanting to open up the back of a 1940s bungalow to a garden. I got the email from Denise while I was standing in someone else's kitchen, looking at a wall we were about to remove. I read it, and then I put my phone away, and I finished the ISIT meeting. That evening, Adrian came over for dinner. She'd brought ingredients for the lentil soup, the one from the first night at her apartment. I let her make it in my kitchen, which by then had started to feel like our kitchen. I stood at the counter while she cooked and told her about the email. She stopped stirring. She turned around and looked at me. Then she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me, and I held on. It was not a dramatic moment. No one cried. No one made a speech. We just stood there in the kitchen that I'd renovated with my own hands, in the house that still had its oak staircase and its east-facing window, while the soup went quiet on the stove. That salvaged window with the wavy glass, the one I'd sent her a photo of last winter, I'd finally decided what to do with it. I put it in the back door, the one that opens to the garden. On clear mornings, the light comes through it and bends slightly, just off true, and lands on the kitchen floor, in a shape that's almost, but not quite, a perfect rectangle. I used to think imperfect things needed fixing. I've changed my mind about that.